Brian Williams, who may drop in here today, he told a wonderful story yesterday, if you were at John Mooney's demonstration yesterday, about the shaving. Yeah, and then he lathered up his eyebrows and shaved his eyebrows off. In an odd way, that says so much to me about who the man was, and I'm not trying to shape the story that he tells. All the stories will tell that. But that's different than finding out that he was born in 1902 in Mississippi. We in this community knew him. I didn't, but the community knew him, and the purpose of this hour is to keep those stories alive and help to pass them on, which is the tradition of all of this and how it came to us in the beginning. All right? So why don't I start with, since Dave, since you have the microphone. I'm going to start with Dave here, and he'll tell you who he is and start the story.
I think it's on for you.
It's a trick that we do here. It's yeah.
Hello?
Yeah. Microphones.
Hello. Yeah, there it is.
Thank you, John.
My name is David Sperber. I'm a physician. I'm a psychiatrist. And my contact with Son House occurred when I was a third-year medical student at Genesee Hospital. It was my first clinical rotation in internal medicine. And I can picture to this day, this would have been in December of '69 or January, maybe February of '70. And it was a low point in his life, which I'll explain. I can picture the room and bed that he was in. It's very vivid in my mind. He wasn't my patient. I wasn't assigned to him because he was a surgical patient. What had happened was, because of the alcoholism, he had passed out in a snowbank I think on Alexander Street, and was brought into the hospital with frostbite of toes and fingers. And so when I first encountered him, he was an elderly black gentleman who was quietly lying in the bed with bandages and having his, he had had some amputations of, as I recall, of some toes and I think some parts of fingers, I think on his left hand. I didn't know who he was, and I didn't interact with him, but then I started to, I don't know exactly how it happened, but the name on the bed said Eddie House, and all of the nurses just called him Eddie, and in a very patronizing way. And one day I got to talking with him, and I asked him what he had done for a living, and he said, "Oh well, I've done a lot of this and a lot of that, but I like to play music. I like to play the blues." And I said, "Oh, you mean like a hobby?" And he said, "Oh no, not a hobby. I played all over the place." And so and then he mentioned and I had never heard of Son House at that point. But a little something about me that kind of was part of what happened is that I had come from New York City and was a musician. I went to a school for music in New York City, and I was also a kind of left-wing civil rights advocate at the University of Rochester Medical School. And so I met Son House, and the two things came together. So he told me, I said, I called him Mr. House just out of respect, and he told me that his name, I said, I haven't heard of Eddie House. He said, well, no, they call me Son House. And I said, oh, okay. And then I went to a friend of mine who was a real blues aficionado in my class in the medical school, a guy named Eugene Borkan. And I said, Gene, you know a lot about blues. Have you ever heard of a guy named Son House? And he just about did a cartwheel. He said, Son House? Son House? I said, yeah, he's my patient at Genesee Hospital, or I know him at Genesee Hospital. He said, I have to come and see him. So Gene and I went in and had some real chatting with Son House. And then he was really despondent. He said he's never going to be able to play again because of his hands, and we were very much about kind of trying to fix the world, and So we said, no, come on, you can do it. You can. We're sure you can do it. What can we do to help you? So he was, I think, very embarrassed about what had happened to him. He said, well, you could call my agent and manager, and said, okay, would you give us his name and number? So he gives us Dick Waterman's name and number. And we said, okay, we're going to call him, and you've got to get back to playing. That'll make your life better. So we called one of us, I can't remember which one. We called Dick Waterman, and then kind of the story shifts because Dick Waterman had come up and I think and gotten him help to get him back on his feet, and the next contacts were very shortly after he got out of the hospital, and he had his first public gig. And I think this was when Muddy Waters came and was playing at the Glass Onion on Marshall Street, and Muddy or Son House came in, and they had a reunion right there in the club, and Son House was really nervous. I don't think he had his guitar with him, but Muddy Waters said, "You got to play," and he said, "I can't play. My fingers, my hands." He said he gave him the guitar, and Son House got up on the stage, and he hadn't lost a lick. He just played, and it was very moving to me and Gene Borcan, who was there, and then he was also at the Genesee Co-op, which we had helped to set that up for him to have a show there, or he participated with somebody. I think he might have been on Mike Seeger's show. Anyway, that was the story. We like to think that we played some role in extending his career beyond 1969, 1970. So.
Debate, by the way, and Dan, you can chime in about this, is Dan Beaumont, who wrote the book Preaching the Blues, as to where he fell into the snowbank, because I've heard 4 or 5 different versions.
Well, it was in the 3rd ward.
Okay, all right.
Way home from a bar on Rochester Street and passed out. And he laid there for a while before somebody found him.
What did Mrs. House say?
What's that?
What did Mrs. House say about that?
No, I don't know. I never talked to either of them. But it was, I know what Joe Beard said about it. He went and visited him in the hospital, and it was really hard for him to play after that. He did a tour of England immediately after that, and that was, Dick, I'm here now, but at the end of that, there's a recording made of that, one of his performances. Actually, it was effectively his last performance except for Toronto. And Dick said, it's like he's retiring. And so, but it was really hard for him to play after that. Joe said the same thing. But, you play like, sitting around with like John Moon and Brian Williams and do some things. It was like, and there was a lost opportunity too, because while he was laid up, Bill Graham called Dick. And
Bill Graham, you know who Bill Graham is? Bill Graham,
block entrepreneur.
the producer of that.
Fillmore West, Fillmore East, etc. And Clapton, Eric Clapton, had been, this is after like the disintegration of Blind Faith, the super group that did one album on tour. And they'd had an opening act named Delaney and Bonham. Sure. And Clapton was kind of fed up with the whole kind of super group thing, and from Cream and Blind Faith, and he started sitting in and hanging out with Delaney and Bonnie, who were like a Southern boogie band. They had some hits, and then he basically sat in with them and toured with them. And so this, for Delaney and Bonnie, that changed. They went from playing this to this. Eric Clapton is now part of the band, just playing as a sideman. And Delaney and Eric told Bill Graham, let's get Son House on the bill at Fillmore East, which would have been like the biggest gig of his life, for sure. You know, it's like Clapton's name at that point was huge, and it's just like the same thing, anything, you know, it's like all the people who were Eric Clapton fans, if Eric Clapton says this is Son House and he's great, they're gonna go out and buy his records. But he couldn't do it. It was like, his life had these two big moments, one Grafton that fell short because of the Great Depression, and then the other where he missed this gig that would have been the biggest thing he ever did, because of his own failings, you know. But that was the end of his career, really. I mean, he did Toronto and some things locally. John Mooney would bring him out for a few songs and things like that, but effectively that accident ended his real performing career, except for that tour of England.
Thank you. Let me move on to Carvin and then to Ron. Both, I don't know if you were here for the film. Had pieces of that, so talk to us a little bit about that.
I'll just start by saying, you know, I think Dan's reflection is really interesting, but I'm going to come at that from a different angle. You can never know that. You can speculate on that, but you can never know that that would have been the greatest moment of his life. You can never know that. You can assume that because of the venue and because of perhaps the volume of people, but that's kind of denying his humanity and what he may have thought were other great moments in his life that maybe were, as far as the public is concerned, maybe very small moments, maybe very intimate. So I kind of reject that a little bit, but you know, I understand the optics of it. I'll just say that I'm probably one of the people up here who knew Son House the least. I did meet him with Mark Brady, who had an extraordinarily warm and wonderful relationship with this man. When he would come in his house, him and his wife would both greet him with such joy. So Mark had struck up something with this guy that was nice. And I'm 24, 25 years old. I didn't know anything about the blues except in the most general sense. And I thought what I saw is a lot of people were giving this guy alcohol and he was playing and taking him here and taking him there. And I was somewhat a little, you know, like taken aback by that. But, you know, I was there, we were in graduate school and it was, you know, post-60s and a lot of things were going on. But where I entered the picture is here. Because of the extraordinary work that Ron did, Ron and his team, production team, did 40-something years ago, 41 years ago, over a 2-year period. It was like I inherited the possibility and the ability to look at the majority of that footage. And what I learned about this man and this period is just, it has stamped my life and changed my life. And I am so honored to have that opportunity, and I want to just publicly thank you for that. These guys were making films back when everybody's a filmmaker today, right? Everybody's got a camera, everybody's got a computer, everybody's got a cell phone, YouTube is there. But these guys were shooting when you had equipment where you had to understand light, you had to understand exposure, shutter speed, aperture, and you had to get the shot. Plus, they were trying to direct a guy who, can you imagine directing Son House? All right, can you imagine telling Son House to go walk, 12 feet and turn right? They were doing that and shooting film at the same time. If you're doing that and shooting video, you could just erase the tape. But if you're shooting film, you're not gonna do that. So very easily, but they shot an incredibly sophisticated and probing portrait into this man. And it's not just the music, it's the human being behind the music, and that's what I take from it. And then also, I have to say, it's important for me to put this in some kind of social context, because I think often we forget where the blues comes from, right? we're all good now, and we have parity now, and we can say, you know, that all these things are connected. But let's not forget the United States of America that created a situation, right, for people of color at that time, which created the blues, because they were living in very marginal conditions and eating pellets that were fed to animals, and were unable, having their families broken up. And we suffer from that today, right? People don't like to deal with that, but we suffer from that. There's straight lines from there to there. So I just want to put that in perspective. And the photographs, those incredible photographs from the Library of Congress that Ron had, and one or two from my own collection, one that I used from my film Shadows of the Lynching Tree. To me, that helps put that in perspective, because what I see in this film, and it's only two things I want to say, what I see in this film is this extraordinary arc of this man's life. It's an extraordinary arc where I can't imagine what his life would have been about, only from what I understand about history as a teacher, as a filmmaker. I can understand what that history must have been about. But to see him go, there are two moments in that film that make sense for me, and they sort of bracket the main idea, that there's the lynching of Willie Brown. There's a mob of people standing, smiling, very, very secure with themselves, knowing that they have done the right thing. And before them lays a man named Willie Brown who is being burnt alive, right? So Son House and all of the guys that Dick talked about, they would have known that. They would have felt that. They would have channeled that. That's in that music, as far as I'm concerned. And then at the end of his life, the concert that Dick talks about, the concert that Ron and his team shot with great clarity, right? Here this man stands before thousands of people, and that's just an incredible moment to me, that he's got that arc and that he could see that in his lifetime. And that's important to me as a filmmaker. That's something that stuck out. And then the last thing I would say, this is the joy for me. This guy was on time every time. All right, you understand what I'm saying? He's on time every time. When you take a piece of footage and he's clapping, you could take that footage from the 1960 or whenever and drop it in a piece of footage that was shot 30, 40 years later, and the guy is still right on time. And if you get a chance, I think Skip said they're going to show my film tomorrow, 7 o'clock. Please come and see it. Just check out some of those subtleties, because the guy is on time, right? And to me, that is so incredibly, I mean, that's the pulse that I was able to find. And then you connect that to Ron, what they did, have him walking all over town. You see a Cornhill that is sort of the precursor of the Cornhill that we have now. Some construction was going on. So I just really appreciate that, and it is my honor to be part of this esteemed group of people who actually knew him and actually spent time with him. I can imagine that it must have been an incredible time. And so I just thank you for including me.
Yes, indeed. Let's give it to Ron to follow up. But before you speak, Ron, this is Brian, who's coming in now and making his way up to the chair. So he tries to do that subtly. And I'm not sure, we're trying to figure out how to get the film shown again. There's so many people who want to see it, but we're not sure about the 7 o'clock showing tomorrow yet. So hold on. Okay, well, unless you know something I don't.
Well, Jenny told me, so I thought she.
Oh, then there you go. So then now he says it's official, so I haven't spoken to Jenny about that.
Well, I hope you're right.
Lots of people want to see it. So let's turn it to Ron to ask the question that Carvin brought up. What was it like to direct the man?
Let me just set this up a little bit, how this whole thing developed. I set up a company with my partner, Luis Villalone, and we were doing a lot of work for Kodak and Xerox. Especially Xerox seemed endless amount of some money. We would fly around, we always have to be first class. So we had about, maybe $20,000 left over. So my partner said, let's do a documentary on Son House. I go, Son who? He said, Son House, he's a blues person. So I said, well, that sounds interesting. Let's pursue it and see what happens. So we talked to Dick Waterman, and Dick said, go ahead and do it, but make sure that Evie knows about it, his wife Evie. So we talked to Evie, and Evie said, okay, but when you take him out, you be very careful with him. Don't let him have any alcohol at all. So we said, sure, we'll do that, make sure we're no problem. As soon as we went out the door, need a little primer. I said, now Evie said, no primer. So I'm not going to do it then. So it's now, okay, here's a Genesee beer. Will you do it now? That's nothing but milk. So I said, well, that's all we can give you, son. So son said, oh, okay. So he, right, just as Dick Waterman said, right down. So for a lot of the times he was okay, but some of the times he was just out, in Gaga land. And he'd start talking about it and then just sort of almost fall asleep. But we did set up a couple of concerts. One was at the Red Creek, and we had the same problem at the Red Creek. All the good old boys at the Red Creek would start giving him alcohol, and we had to go from shooting to keeping him from getting the alcohol, going back.
Is there a moment with Son that comes to mind? Is there a moment is there a memory that comes to mind? Something that can help illuminate for us who he was?
I found him to be a very gentle person while we were working with him. He, as Carvin was saying, we had to direct him going down the street and looking at this and looking at that, and he took direction quite well. Yeah, so we didn't have any problem with that, and I think the biggest problem we had was trying to get running out of money, because we were at a certain point where we had to, it's like, okay, now we need to go into some interviews with other people. And we couldn't do it, so we put I should explain, 16 millimeter film, color negative, is something you don't project. It's a medium that you transfer eventually to any other medium you want. In the old days, it would be film. Today, it's high definition television. So we had to transfer that stuff, but we didn't have the money to do it. So we put it on a shelf, put it in the basement, carried it to a couple different houses that we lived in, and it went through a fire, a major fire that destroyed our house, but fortunately it was in the basement and it survived. Some of the photographs you see out there, the watercolors that Robert Trussell did, were singed around the edges, but they survived too. And the interesting...
There's some of the images in it are so amazing because they give us the personal side of Son, particularly for me, particularly the dancing at the end. But I'm concerned about focusing too much on the film for people who haven't seen the film, and I want to keep the focus back on Son if we can. So let me, if you wouldn't mind, Ron, can I give it to Armand to talk a little bit? And I'm assuming that you all know Armand, who is synonymous, House of Guitars. So Armand, can you give us some insights into Son as well?
Well, we first met him when we opened up a coffee house in Charlotte called the Black Candle, and then later changed the name to Studio 9. And friends were talking that Son House lived on Gregg Street, and we should try to get him. So we went over to his house, and we met with him and Evie, and we didn't bring no alcohol or anything like that. It was a business meeting, and I noticed the house was very well kept, and Son House was taken care of. I didn't know he was a drinker at the time, but he was living the blues. But we got him to agree to play 2 nights at our coffee house that particular time, and we brought him there the first night, no problem, and then he played and put on a great performance. But then we paid him for the 2 nights the first time, and then the second time when he was supposed to show, he wasn't there. And then we had to search from club to find him, you know. And then we found him in a neighborhood bar, and a couple black people came out and said that you can't go in there, a white person has never been in there. I said, that's cool. But they were very polite to me. They just said it's something to do with the bar and that. We said, that's okay. That he's due to play at our coffee house tonight. And they brought him out, and he didn't like that he had to stop drinking to go in the car with us. But we took him to our coffee house, and then we put him on the stage, and we helped tune his guitars and open tuning and everything. We were in awe of him. I mean, we looked up to this man like he was the greatest thing, you know. To him, it all started right with him back in the late 20s, you know. This is a man that without him, there wouldn't probably rock and roll. It wouldn't exist. And he performed his songs, but at first he says, I'm not going to play until you give me a goddamn drink. So we didn't serve alcohol, so we're scrambling in the back. We sold like Poison Green and hot cherry cider with cinnamon sticks, cappuccino. You know, we were a coffee house, like a beatnik coffee house kind of thing. And we had artists, had paintings displayed on our walls all the time, and we painted the front windows with a broom of black paint for light came in, but you couldn't see in. Then we put these huge green swinging doors on the front of it, but we had a nice stage, and it was a cool place, and it was sold out. It was crammed, and we eventually mixed some beer and some other stuff and gave it to him, and he drank that, and he was okay. He was still probably a little mad we pulled him out of the bar, you know. But when he played, he was right there, and it's like the crowd didn't exist. He just performed this thing, and he took you back to the late 20s, the 30s, the 40s, his hard life in those days, and he was full of dynamics. He'd go up and down. He'd stop dead. He'd be sitting there. Then all of a sudden he'd jump up and say, "My black mama," and then start sliding the guitar. You know, it was the most powerful thing I ever saw in my life. I wouldn't want to go on the stage after him. I wouldn't want to follow him. This man owned the audience. His guitar skills have dwindled a little at the time, but it fitted his mood and his song. It was like a dynamic performance. And I'm proud to know this man, and I could tell from the house he came in with that it was very well kept, and he was very well taken care of by his wife. And I just remember a painting of Martin Luther King up near the couch, and then another painting of John Kennedy. But it was a real honor to meet the man, and he was his own man. He wasn't somebody you could push around or anything. He lived the blues. He just looked at us like we didn't know what we were talking about, because we didn't understand totally, and probably never will, his lifestyle back in the late 20s and 30s. And he did have that inner conflict about religion and the blues. To us, it didn't make a lot of sense, but to him it did, you know. And, you know, like bluesmen were the opposite of church going, you know, as the jukeboxes, and him and Charlie Patton would follow the migrant workers, put up a white tent, serve bootleg alcohol in Sun House, and Charlie Patton would be the entertainment, you know, on the weekends.
You know, and we're going to go to two more, and then we'll come out here and see if there's folks who've got some stories to tell out here. But working on the play, on the reading a couple of nights ago, we've been at work on that play for quite some time now, and the battle that he had, not only with the conflict and the struggle with religion, but also the battle with alcoholism, the erosion of the battle of alcoholism it's fascinating to me. The stories are funny, but hearing them for a year, they become very sad. And I don't mean sad because he was extraordinary even to the end. He was an extraordinary artist.
You're right,
But
but
they're sad to me because it's an insight into the battle that he had to be waging all the time, all the time.
It is a sickness, but he lived longer than most of them. You know what I mean?
I know.
I mean, he had great strength, and I also like to add that he was a real gentleman. He'd never brag about himself or anything. You know, you had to kind of pull it out of him. He's a gentle person.
Thank you, Armand.
Yes.
So let's go to Brian, we'll come back over to Rich. Let's go to Brian, yes, thank you. If you were here watching John Mooney yesterday afternoon, Brian was on some big thing, plucking some strings. I think is what he was doing at that point. Can you tell us about your connection with Sun and
Sure. I played bass with John Mooney for about 10 years. I met John, I'm going to lead into the Sun House connection because for me it's through John Mooney. I met John when he came down to one of my gigs in my first band that was playing at the Cottage Hotel in Mendon, and met him in that way. He would sit in and play music on our breaks, and eventually I ended up playing regularly with John. But on the first meeting of John, I said, "Where did you learn to play like that, man?" And he said, "Oh, from Sun House." And for me, it was an amazing awakening because I had first seen Sun House playing in the coffee houses of Greenwich Village in 1965.
better. You know, I work with microphones all the time, and I kind of like the idea of not having to use one.
Let's find the sweet spot here. And I had seen Sun House, as I said, in the coffee houses of New York City and also at various folk festivals, Philadelphia Folk Festival and Newport Folk Festival in 1965. And I was in awe of him for the same reasons that Armand just mentioned. When Sun would play, the blues and his expression of the blues and music just took over his entire being. His eyes would roll back in his head. And he was in another space, another dimension, and I'm sure you've witnessed that plenty when he.
Yeah, he was back in time.
Just phenomenal, and I had seen up close and personal plenty of the old classic bluesmen of that, who were kind of in their revival stage of their lives: Mississippi John Hurt and Reverend Gary Davis, Booker White, Skip James. And they all were fabulous in their own way, but there was something very unique and special about Sun House and his musical expression. So through John and Joe Beard, who actually was the one who introduced John to Sun House, John and I would go over to Sun's house, and we would wave upstairs or yell up to the window and see if John could come out and play. Literally, if Sun could come out and play, excuse me. Which he would do on occasion, but his wife was very strict and said, "I don't want him coming back with any liquor on his breath." Well, there was no way to get Sun to play without giving him some primer. He would ask, the first thing he would say is, "You got the primer?" So on a couple of occasions, we would bring Sun over to my house, and Evie was not happy about that at all. But we would try to, once we learned how quickly he could get lit from booze, we tried to measure the amount we would give him, balancing that between getting some tunes out of him. Evie really cared for him a lot. And of course, she wanted to take care of him by monitoring his drinking. But I'll tell you an interesting story that John related to me, John Mooney. He was over visiting Sun one day, and Evie needed to do some grocery shopping. So John and Sun accompanied her to the store, and all along the walk to the store, they were saying, "Now, Evie, can you get a quart of beer for us?" And she said, "Oh, no. And that exchange went on and on throughout the walk to the store. She went in and did the shopping, and John and Sun she made them stay outside. Then she came out with 3 grocery bags of groceries, and gave one to John, one to Son, and she kept one herself. And of course, John and Son immediately look in their bag to see if there's any beer in there, and there wasn't. And the whole time walking home, have you got any beer in there? Did you get us any beer? They get to the house, unpack John's bag, unpack Son's bag of groceries. Now they're all standing there waiting to see what's in Evie's bag of groceries. And sure enough, she had a quart of beer in there, which the guys were very happy about. But it just illustrates that she didn't want him drinking, didn't want to support his alcoholism, but I think she probably figured that there was this point where she could give him a little bit to make him happy, but not enough that would send him to where he had gone so many times before. He was, as Armand said, a real gentleman. In fact, I believe he, for a while, was a doorman at the hotel that was on the intersection of Clinton Avenue and Mount Hope. There was a hotel there years ago. I think he was a doorman there. Maybe Dan, do you know anything about that? Yeah.
There's all these stories from other people, other jobs he had. He worked for a veterinarian, and Howard Johnson.
Yeah, there were all these little side events. But I remember hearing third hand of someone who actually had encountered him as the doorman and said that he was impeccably dressed and a true gentleman, soft-spoken, and was there to help the clientele with whatever they needed. So he was also a sweetheart of a guy, and I experienced that personally. He was always interested in how we were doing, and did we have the primer?
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
I robbed you of your shaving story. I told that before.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Okay, let me introduce Rich.
Yeah, my name's Rich Gardner. Can you hear me? I'm a writer. In the 1980s, I had a blues show on what's now called Jazz 90.1. And the blues show and my theme music was Son House's Grinning in Your Face. And I was wondering whatever became of this guy. In 1981, I found him living in Detroit. I went to Detroit and visited him very briefly. Between the time his wife almost wouldn't let me in the door and politely threw us out, there was two of us, about an hour and a half later, I got to spend some quality time with him. Probably one of the few times in his life that there wasn't booze and swearing and cigarette smoke and guitars being tuned in the background. And I wrote this book about that. It's at the House of Guitars and in the lobby at 4 o'clock. But equally as important, this is Son's house in Cornhill where he lived on Gregg Street. The street and the house are no longer there. Some of you may know this is the Department of Corrections halfway house. It's right next door to where Son's house was. It's still there. You can see the detail of the eaves in that picture here.
And do you mind if we leave these out afterwards?
Yeah.
Folks go out, they can take a look.
This is Son in his house. It's just taken, let me show you this one first. This is Son tuning the guitar in his house. And what's significant about this being Son in his house is that 2 RIT students took this picture, which is typical of who came to visit him. And he's open tuning into G like he usually did. And this is Son, I was told by the fellow who gave me these pictures, coming back from the liquor store. He volunteered to go get it, and I'm quite sure he bought 2 bottles and drank one on the way back and shared the second. Yeah. And I agree with something that Carvin said earlier. I sometimes think that the father of the blues was my ancestors, not Carvin's ancestors.
Very sophisticated point.
All right, great, thank you. Thank you, sir. Just want to make sure, are the Knox family here? They were coming today, and I haven't met them. I just wanted to see if they're here. No? Okay. Then let's open it out here. Stories out here. We'll start with Jack down here. Thank you.
I just have two questions. I regret, I came here in 1970, and to my endless regret, I never saw the house. I never got to the fifth on. I mean, I think are legendary, but I missed them, so I have to listen to you guys. And I'm glad to. I was wondering two things. Does anybody know what happened to Evie? Did she outlive him? What happened to her? Evie, I mean. And then I also wonder if, and this is not meant to be a judgmental question, it's just an honest kind of reflection on things. When any of you talked to him, and he obviously seemed like such a gentle guy and a really interesting, gentle but great, obviously talented man. But the fact that he had a couple murders in his past ever come into play, ever get talked about, the rulings on those have always been self-defense. But the fact that there was that violence in his past, was it ever a factor in any discussions or anything?
No, I think the first time it was a charge of manslaughter. He was charged with manslaughter, and I don't think the police even knew what happened. It's just, to them, a couple black guys that had a fight and one died, you know? And I don't think, and neither one of them would probably talk, so, I mean, one couldn't, but I don't think the people there would talk, so I think he just ended up in prison. But the second one was self-defense, and he was let go. So he really...
Yeah, I didn't, like I said, I didn't mean judgment. I didn't say that he was, I shouldn't use the word murder even.
Yes.
I just meant that he had some violent aspects of his past.
Well, he's a tough guy. He could handle himself. You could tell, you know, he was very self-assured, but he was quiet and didn't brag. He was a nice person. But if you
know about anything about Evie? She outlived?
I know she passed away, but I'm not sure. I think it was a little after, wasn't it?
Passed away in 99. I read it 11 years after.
11 years after?
Yeah, she passed away in 99. Son died in 88.
Other questions? All the way up top up there.
Yeah,
Or
question.
comments?
You said that there's a picture of him tuning the guitar in his house. I heard his wife didn't let him play guitar in the house. She had made him go out on the porch to play guitar because she didn't want any blues in there or something.
He could play in the house, but it couldn't be blues. It had to be spiritual or gospel, yeah.
This is, that moment right there was so cool. Because that was when it becomes something else, and we're still at a place right now when we can touch the source and find the truth.
Yeah.
That was pretty great. Yes. That was kind of one of the points of these 4 days, just happened right there before it gets passed on. So thank you for that. That was lovely. That was wonderful.
Can I just say one thing quickly? He did give us a bar of grinning in your face while he was in his apartment, so he broke the rule.
What did his wife say?
Great. All the way up top?
She threw us out.
Okay, you say that he has to be primed all the time. Is there any incidents, especially when you said he gave you the bar of grinning in the house, that he played without being primed? I'm wondering if he just thought he had to be primed to play. Because when you're dealing with alcoholics, they think they can't dance without the alcohol, but yet when they recover, they learn they can dance. And I'm wondering if he just associated playing with alcohol.
Yeah.
The opposite of preaching for him in that growing up era.
Yeah.
In Detroit, he was cleaned up, and he'd been cleaned up for several years.
And he played just as well?
He sang just as well.
Brian?
I never knew of an instance, never experienced an instance where he played without primer.
Okay. Other things. Let's go here and then right down below you, right there, Johnny.
Hi, Rich. I actually want to catch up with you after this about those photos because I just inherited them myself like last week. Yeah. So it was great to share those. Actually, we put them up on Facebook. I took the one where he's tuning the guitar and made it more of a black and white. But at any rate, the stories that I was going to share are kind of secondhand from a mutual friend of ours, Alex. And they're tough stories. I wasn't really sure I kind of wanted to share them, but I think in scope of honesty, why not? And these touch a little bit on his later years here in the mid 70s when we didn't, at the time, nobody really called it dementia or Alzheimer's, but there was an element of his mind that was also going along with the alcoholism. So Alex would, as a lot of other young white guys did at the time, show up over there to, get him a little primed and sit and play some guitar with him and stuff, and occasionally leave a guitar with him. And then, one time he went back and was looking around the apartment. He couldn't find the guitar. So he says, "Son, where's the guitar that I let you borrow?" And he's, "Oh, wow." And he started kind of just meandering around the apartment, and he was picking up like clothespins and pens and small objects that obviously a whole guitar is not underneath, the can on the stove or whatever. But, I think it was just that he was not really all there with it. And another time they were playing with a 14 fret jointed body guitar. And Son usually was used to playing a guitar with a body that met the neck at the 12th fret. So when he would do that zing thing that he was real known for, he would kind of almost know when his hand hit the body of the guitar, he was at the 12th fret. When you kind of threw a variable at him there, he's playing this other guitar, and he came up and now he's hitting at the 14th fret, and so he's sharp, a whole step of what notes he thinks he's playing, but he was so not in it that it didn't register with him, so.
When was this?
This would have been around, Danforth Towers times. So I don't know, maybe 75.
Okay, great, thank you. And down here?
Well, I think it's unfortunate that Joe Beard's not here.
Well, Joe actually was asked to be here and had agreed and will be part of the dedication this afternoon and is playing tonight. And he got in touch with us this morning and said it's just three events in a row is going to be a bit much for me.
Yeah.
But he'll be with us this afternoon and tonight. So.
The reason I say that is because, and I also read this in Dan Beaumont's book, that Joe Beard was the exception to the rule. He did not have to offer alcohol in order to get Son to play, and he and Son played quite often, I guess, outside the apartment and as well as in. And Joe has said that the alcohol was never an issue.
That's really good to hear. That's nice to hear. It's one of the phrases that was used to describe Son when we began the research on the play. We heard the phrase that he was his own man a few times. But Dick actually told us when we were down in Clarksville, tell us that they would go on long car rides to go between gigs, and that Son would just sit in the passenger side and just stare out the window. And every now and then he would mention something that he saw, but that it was very quiet between them. But then Joe is a completely different experience with him. And when you were talking to Joe, there was this Joe who was roughly his age and had this and shared some of the same kind of background. Said they just he would come alive, and it was a completely different person around him. That was great for us to try to fill out the character of Son. So, did you have another comment?
Yes. It's been said that he worked at a Howard Johnson's, and I have a personal experience of that. I believe it was Armand who said he was observed working at Howard Johnson's.
He was a cook?
Yeah.
He was a short order cook and dishwasher there.
It was the one right at 12 Corners, right?
The information's in the back of the Columbia album.
Oh, okay.
His main job was a porter working for the railroad, though. He would load the luggage onto the train, then go to Albany and unload it.
Right. Well, I was a student at Brighton High School, between 1960 and 63. And I remember seeing a gentleman at the Howard Johnson's as a short order cook at sometime during that time. I didn't know who Son House was then, but I was struck by this person because he wore a Mississippi string tie.
Yeah,
and later on I reflected on it and I said, I'll bet that was Sun House.
Great. One more comment, or should we? Well, let's just go down here for the wrap-up comment, and I'll say something.
Thank you. I have a question. Directed to Mr. Schaubroeck.
Yes.
For years, I have heard a rumor that you folks had, big part. For years, Mr. Schaubroeck, I've heard a rumor that you have recorded Sun House at your coffee shop, and
No,
there's a tape.
not
that
true,
exists.
no.
Thank you. Now the rumor can finally be put to rest.
I think Joe Beard recorded some recordings with him.
Okay.
But
Thank you.
we never, we didn't have a tape recorder back then.
Thank you.
Wish I did,
Wink.
but I didn't.
I want to point to Brian here real quick because of what you said. Do you remember what I'm referring to? You talked about how many times you guys were sitting in the living room playing. I'll let you say.
Well, at my house, in retrospect, I'd have very valuable recordings if I had recorded them at that time. And I had the capability, it just never dawned on me that that's what we should be doing.
Dick said that too. He said, boy, if I'd have known at that time that I was going to be speaking as a historian, well, I'm sure I would have taken things a lot differently back then. Okay, last comment here, yeah.
I have a question for Mr. Eison.
What was that? Question for you,
Carvin.
Yes.
You mentioned a Willie Brown who was lynched or murdered. Is that the same Willie Brown that was mentioned in the play that was Son's best friend who lived here?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah, it's a very common name.
Godson's son?
Very common, but no.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I would just say, Skip, if I could say one quick thing. So, one of the things that hasn't been said that I think is really tells me a lot about this man is this guy is pressed. You understand what I'm saying? Every time you see him, he's got on his Stetson. He's got, in the footage in Toronto, he's got on, when he's on the boat, he's got on a bow tie, and then somehow he takes the bow tie off and he has another tie on. And then when he gets up to play, he doesn't have a tie. He's got on red slacks. He always has his belt slung at a certain angle that is totally not typical. And he is mixing plaid and plaid. I mean, he was really, this says a lot to me about him. In the picture with John Hurt and Skip James, he's, he just has a certain connoisseur, just a real sophistication about his presence. And I think that tells me a lot about that man.
Even a better hat than yours.
There you go.
Well, let's thank all these guys for coming.